Back in October, Hunter Biden's former business associate, Tony Bobulinski, claimed the Biden family shrugged off concerns that Joe Biden's alleged ties to Hunter's business dealings could put a future presidential campaign at risk. Watch this.
And I remember looking at Jim Biden and saying, how are you guys getting away with this? Like, aren't you concerned? And he looked at me and he laughed a little bit and said, plausible deniability.
Wow. Remember that? But the media largely ignored those claims back then until now. And here with more, New York Post columnist Miranda Devine. Hey, Miranda.
Hi, Ainsley. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. When you look at what the media's coverage of that, I mean, he's talking about details of Joe Biden knowing about his son's business dealings and Joe Biden's influence and involvement in this. And the media barely covered it. Look at that. MSNBC, a little more than a minute. CNN, 0. ABC, 0. NBC, 1:30 about. And CBS, 0 minutes. Fox covered it. But this was extremely important, especially before an election.
Well, exactly. The New York Post story broke on October 14, which is more than 2 weeks before the election. It should have been covered. And instead, it was actively suppressed. It was ignored. We heard Project Veritas had these CNN morning news conference meetings that were leaked. And in there, they said, look, we're not going to cover this. They were proud of it because they said there's nothing new in the New York Post's information. Well, there was a lot of new stuff in what we published from Hunter Biden's laptop, and that included, for the very first time, evidence that the then Vice President Joe Biden knew about what was going on with his family's influence peddling schemes around the world and was actively involved. Now, we published an email to that effect, and later on, Tony Bobulinski backed that up with further evidence of his own. All of that was a story, and yet you had not just active suppression, but you had big tech locking our Twitter account, throttling the story on Facebook. And then you had 50 intelligence operatives signing a letter saying that this looked, even though they had no idea, they hadn't seen the laptop, looked like they hadn't even read our stories, said, oh, this looks very much like a Russian disinformation operation. And that, of course, was the green light to all those media outfits like CNN and the Washington Post and NPR and so on and on, to pretend that our story was Russian disinformation, that we effectively at the New York Post were acting as Russian agents. It was all a ruse to get their man over the line in the election, to get Joe Biden across the line with zero scrutiny into what really is a fishy story. And now, of course, they're reporting it because they think that they've won.
You know, it's frustrating for conservatives because they saw what happened with Hillary Clinton with the dossier. They went after President Trump for 4 years. They did every negative story on President Trump. Barely any positive stories on him if you look at the stats. They did all these praised pieces on Biden. Biden stays in his basement, doesn't come out, doesn't go, he doesn't answer questions. President Trump answers every question, and then they criticize everything that he says. And then when voters go to the polls, 74 million of them to vote, they're worried that their votes didn't count or that something fishy happened. The president says it was rigged. Gallup poll, 89% of Republicans say there's serious doubts about this election process. Quinnipiac poll, 77% of Republicans believe there was widespread voter fraud. What's your message to conservatives who they just feel betrayed? They feel like they're forgotten.
Well, it's not just conservatives. I've seen polls showing that 30% of Democrats, at almost half the country, thinks that there was something untoward about the election. And look, it's a serious problem, and the reason for it is because the Democrats decided under the cover of COVID that they would change the rules at the last minute. That has just added with all this mail-in ballots, which are so susceptible to fraud, industrial strength mail-in balloting. It's just added to this terrible sense that something didn't go right with the election. And I don't know how you fix that, because people have a feeling already before Inauguration Day that if Joe Biden is in there, he is not a legitimate president. And that's something held by, almost half the country. That's very damaging.
Yeah, and Republicans worry that Democratic leaders are going to say from now on they're mail-in ballots, and then Republicans will never have high-ranking positions. And all these Democrats are moving down south to these southern states and turning them purple. Thanks so much, Miranda, for joining us.
Thanks, Ainsley.
You're
and Happy
welcome.
Christmas.
You too.